that they wouldn't be doing. And I know that Kandahar Treasure will be one model that the world can look at to see that sustainable development is possible and that change can happen in small increment ways. We don't necessarily need to focus on big, huge projects, although they're important too, but it is really the small grassroots projects and initiatives that will ultimately make the biggest change.
Finally, Rangina, I wanted to get your opinion of this latest news. The New York Times published an interview that they did with President Obama on Air Force One. They said President Obama declared in the interview that the United States is not winning the war in Afghanistan and opened the door to a reconciliation process in which the American military would reach out to moderate elements of the Taliban, much as it did with Sunni militias in Iraq. Your response, Rangina?
I think that's a very interesting point, and actually I would like to take some time to answer this. In 2001, when the Bonn Agreement was being signed on Afghanistan, as Afghans sitting, obviously not at the table and not at the conference, but we know they're representatives of many of the political parties or groups of the past 30-some years of the war in Afghanistan, all represented at that agreement. I, having absolutely no experience in Afghanistan because I was in America still, I questioned my father. I said, isn't it interesting that almost every group that has been involved in the destruction of Afghanistan since the past 30 years is represented in the Bonn Conference, except for the Taliban. And 7 years later, or 8 years later, that question that I asked is now actually being talked about by the President of America. And it's interesting because if you ask, again, ordinary Afghans, there's a difference between ordinary Afghans and then Afghans who have been involved very brutally in the destruction of Afghanistan. Many Afghans will say that they did not want any of the warlords, the drug lords, the people who destroyed Afghanistan since the late 70s to be involved in the government. But yet the reality and the fact of the matter is, and this is what the world needs to know, that every single thug responsible for the destruction is now in some power position within the government of my country. They're either ministers or advisors or in the Senate or in the parliament or on a local level governors of provinces. So it was only a question of justice and fairness to say, well, if all these guys are in this in this government, why are we excluding the Taliban from it initially? Ideal case scenario, of course, would be to not have any of them involved from day one. But if you are playing fair and just, then you involve the Taliban too. Now, coming back to the question of moderate Taliban, to be honest, I as an Afghan to this day, I still question, first of all, who is a Talib? And I think this is what Americans and the American government also lacks an understanding of. When we talk about the Taliban, who are we really talking about? Because the Taliban movement itself is so divided among itself that there's the Pakistani version, there's the Afghans, there's the the Chechenians or the Arabs or the people who come from from other parts of, or the Somalians, for example, who come from other parts of the world to be involved in this movement. Who are we talking about when we talk about the Taliban? And then when we say moderate Taliban, I almost laugh at that statement, because if it's a moderate Talib who's not actively fighting a war, meaning not blowing himself up or not encouraging others to blow themselves up, then why do we necessarily need to waste resources and time in talking to them? Because they're not the problem. The problem is the extremist. Why aren't we trying harder to reach out to the most extreme? Because that's really the problem makers. And a fact that America needs to accept is when we address the issue of Taliban, be it extreme or moderate, The question of Pakistan is definitely a must. You cannot deny the fact that Pakistan is not involved. Everybody knows this. The entire world knows this. And so unless there's a clear focus or a clear item on the agenda about the issue of Taliban, that Pakistan needs to be actively involved, and that the extremists need to be somehow addressed, I fear that we might be losing time and resources and energy again by just merely focusing on the moderate. Again, I'm not suggesting that it's not a good idea to begin with the moderates, a conversation with the moderates, but that should not be our ultimate goal and the end of the goal. We need to reach out to the extremists, and we also need to reach out and not reach out, but reach out to the people, to the masses, and really just state our goal in Afghanistan. You know, I would like America to clearly state what it wants to achieve in Afghanistan, for how long it wants to be here. When you compare it to Iraq, there's now a clear goal of when America wants to leave, and they're already pulling out troops. And the Iraqis now have a feeling that America will eventually leave. For Afghanistan, we still have no idea. Is this going to be an indefinite war? Is this going to be an indefinite presence in Afghanistan? And if it is, we would like to know. I think Afghans have the right to information, and that information is our right to know. And I think America owes that responsibility to tell us what they're doing here, how long they're going to be here, and what its strategy is in addressing the situation.
Rangina Hamidi is an Afghan activist and founder of KandaharTreasure.com, the first woman-run business in her hometown of Kandahar. She was speaking to us from there. And that does it for our broadcast. We welcome Garrick Baker Staley to the world, son of Becca Staley, our director, and Nathaniel, and brother of Sweet Paige. Paige for Satchel Paige and Garrick for Lou Gehrig. And very best to all of you. We welcome Elizabeth Press back to the Democracy Now! Family, filling in for Becca. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Sharif Abdel-Kadusa, Armate, Angelique Kamet, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Massoud, Robbie Karen. Our website is democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.